Okay, so this is looking at using Apple Motion to create a simple, well, not so simple lower third. The look of it won't be so simple, but the process is. So I'm going to use this video of the guy talking and two bits of information I want to include on this: the guy's name and the fact that he's a marathon runner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from the timeline. And this is one way that I can send content or export a clip to be used in Apple Motion to get some graphics or titling added to it. So I'll right click and send to Motion Project. And what this does is it saves a project file somewhere on the computer that is going to be used for the work that I'm going to do in Motion. So you can't work in any program without effectively using a program file of some sort. So I'm going to call this lower third marathon runner. These will stay checked. Launch Motion, because I want to open the program and start work straight away. And embed Motion content. Yes, I want this guy's video to be embedded within the file that I'm creating. I'll pop that out into a folder on the desktop called lower thirds and click save. So it launches the program, and I should be able to see my video. So there we are. Okay, so Apple Motion might look a little bit foreign if you've only been in it briefly or if you've never been in it, but it really it works in much the same way as Final Cut Pro's Motion tab, but it allows you to use some tools that aren't available in Final Cut Pro. It also allows you to create text in a much more intuitive and flexible kind of way. Before you do, it's important to get the workspace the way you need it so that you can start adding content and working with the timing of your animation for the text. And to do that, you need a timeline. The timeline in Motion is called the timing pane. And you'll see now that I have a track. Well, technically what I have is a group containing a track that is my video, and I've got a clip out here that I can use. So I'll just zoom out of that a little bit. Now the goal here is to create some text and to have a shape behind the text that animates with it. So if we just look at some more professional lower thirds, if you just Google lower thirds on YouTube, you'll find that there's a lot of kits available that sell templates and things like that, and you can see that some of them these are particularly graphic and they use a lot of 3D programs, and some of them are a little bit hyperactive maybe. Okay, so if we just play it on a little bit, actually no, we'll go back to one of those ones. Okay, so you can see here that there's a couple of things going on. We've got some graphic content, we've got a branding, we've got a logo here on the left, we've got a couple of kind of beveled shapes, and we've got some text on top of them. So just to break this down, why these are done the way they are. First of all, when we're using lower thirds, generally speaking, you're going to have a couple of different types of information. You're going to have primary information, secondary information, and possibly more. In this case, we've got World Gold Council 2013, Robert Davis. So what the graphic artist has done here is they've used a couple of ways of separating that information from primary to secondary. So we've got the main information here, which is using a larger type font, and it's against the larger, brighter background shape. And then above that, we've got a smaller font against a darker grey shape. So we've got separation there between our primary information and our secondary text, if you want to call it that. Now, the other reason that these shapes are used behind the text is that when you're working with video, basically you could have lower thirds used across an entire show, and every time a lower third came up on screen you might have some different content behind it. So if you just had yellow text and white text without anything separating the text from the background, the text might accidentally get lost. So if there was something yellow behind the text at some point, then that text wouldn't be visible. If there was something very light or white behind that text, then it wouldn't be visible. Now the branding, if you're going to go that step further, is also, it's very effective in kind of just graphically, I suppose, in bringing out the logo and that kind of thing. Now what we're going to do is a very simplified version of this, in that we're going to use a shape that somewhat resembles this. It's going to be a kind of a skewed rectangle, and we're going to put some text on top of that in a slightly different way. So I'll pop back into Motion. And all the work that I do graphically is going to be done here with a view to sending it back to Final Cut Pro. And when I send something back to Final Cut Pro, it's going to just appear on my timeline in Final Cut. And that's one of the real advantages of working in Motion. So if I just put some text on screen and save that, go back to Final Cut Pro, you'll see that it needs to do a render, but basically you have the text there and it appears on the canvas without you having to do any kind of import or export. Now Premiere and After Effects have something similar going on. It's usually the case when you're working within a family or a suite of programs with the same made by the same company, that they'll give you that kind of functionality. And from here on in, if I wanted to, if that was it, I could leave it there, but if I'm going to update this or modify it at all, then all I do is go back out into Motion, save it, and it's just another case of the text automatically updating. Okay, so what has actually happened here is that Apple Motion works in two ways with its files. So what we have is a project file, and that's the .motn file, and that's here in the desktop. Okay, you can see it there. But as you'll notice here, it also functions as a video file. So you can watch an Apple Motion project file just like you would any QuickTime file. So what it does is it exports basically, or not, doesn't export, but it sits on the computer that you're using as a video file and a project file, but the video file effectively is pulled in almost like a piece of video from a scratch disk if you've done an import or a capture, and that is then being referenced on the timeline. You can see here what the clip I have now is lower third marathon runner.motn. Now the original file is still there, and the sequence lower third marathon runner is also showing up here in the project pane, which contains the original content that had been sent. So this is the untouched pre-send to Motion, and then the timeline that I sent it from actually gets replaced, the content gets replaced with this Motion file. Okay, right, so to get back in now and just do a little bit more work on this. So what I've done here, I'll just delete that. I'll undo it rather. So the way that it works is that wherever the playhead currently sits on the timeline, as soon as you add some content, it shows up down here in whatever one of these groups is currently active. Now we're going to be keeping it simple. I don't want to get too much into all of the aspects of Apple Motion. But just to say that when you start, you have a group. The group contains your clip, and from there on in, whatever you create, text or shapes, is going to show up as another clip here in the timing pane or on your timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some text. So I just click on the T for text, much like any Photoshop or anything like that. And I'm going to, actually before I do, there's one more thing I need to pop up on screen, and those are my safe zones. So you may have seen these in Final Cut Pro. Safe zones give you boundaries that you're advised to put all of your text or graphic content between. And this has a lot to do with how TVs were made and are still made to a degree, in that content can, or the image on TV screens, particularly the old ones, there's this effect of being pulled off to the sides of the screen. So anything that was sitting at exactly the edge of the picture, if you were producing content for an old TV, could get pulled off until it was actually part of it was missing off one side of the screen. It was also to do with the curve of the glass on the old CRT, the old-fashioned TVs as well, which sometimes kind of warped content and pulled it around to the side. So the newer TVs, not so much a problem, but it still is worth putting your text somewhat in from the left and the right and the top and the bottom, but partly because with HD and 16:9 widescreen images, sometimes if they're displayed on a TV in a particular way, the edges get cut off. Okay, now we won't go into the exact details of why, just to say that you're always better off to use safe zones, even if you're producing content for HD. Okay, so I'll type Mike Smith. Now this is the other thing you'll notice, as opposed to Final Cut Pro's way of working, where you have to create a text in the text field on the left, and then automatically, you can't basically write text on the canvas window in Final Cut, but you can in Apple Motion. So it's quite handy. So if you're typing text, you just get your text tool, type the text, and if you want to move it or transform it or do something like that, you get your selection tool. If you want to go back and re-edit it, you just double click in there. So what I'm going to do is drop down onto the next line, put in some new information, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, much like the lower third we looked at a moment ago, I'm going to have primary information, Mike Smith, secondary information, marathon runner, and I'm going to make one primary and one secondary in this case by changing the size of the text. And I can do that here using what's called the HUD, which pops up whenever you create text or a shape or something like that, and or I can do it over here in the inspector on the very left hand side, which has a larger set of properties that I can change for the text. But I just want to change the size for the moment, so I'll get that, drag it down, so click off that, so that doesn't look too bad. It's still a little bit too big because the R is kind of hanging over the edge, so I'll bring it down manually to 27, hit the tab key, and that's a little bit better. So I also want to pull the marathon runner text up a little bit closer to the Mike Smith text, so I'll select it all and I'll adjust what's called the baseline, and that just means that, sorry, I just select the bottom text actually. I can pull that up there. So it really is very simple to create text and format it, and there's a lot more that you can do than just changing the size. You could select all the text and change the tracking, and that'll give you kind of more spaced out text. You can skew it, you can do lots, so you can play around with these in your own time, and you'll find the Apple Help documentation will go through all of these in a lot of detail. Now down on the timing pane, you'll see that I have another layer, another clip. It's a type layer, and I'm going to leave that where it is because it's sitting over the video. That's fine. And the next thing I'm going to do to my text is to create some animation on it. Now this is where motion comes into its own, because I can use what are called behaviors, which are automated animations, and I have a library of these behaviors that allow me to quickly create animations, apply them, see what they look like, modify them a little if I need to, and then move on or change them. So you don't have to do a massive amount of legwork animating them. You can see what the effect is going to look like very quickly, and they are in the library under behaviors. Now you'll see there's a number of different types of behaviors here, but you'll see text animation and text sequence. And text sequence is what I'm interested in, and text basic has the blur in, and you'll see it previewed up here. That's pretty much what I'm looking for. and all I need to do is just drag that down onto the Mike Smith layer, text layer, and you'll see it shows up here as a purple object, and the text disappears, but only because it's at the start of the behavior and it has yet to blur in. Okay, so you can get some nice some nice effects very quickly using behaviors. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the text blur in at the start, and then after a few seconds, when the viewers had time to read it, I'm going to get the blur out, and I'm going to drag that out here. Actually, I don't know why that didn't go out there, but I can drag that out there like so. And what that will do is it will effectively just do the reverse. Now, if the text comes back up on screen, that just means it's because the behavior has ended, and some of these behaviors need to be extended or trimmed out so that they cover the entire now, rather than do that and slow it down, I'll actually just trim back the text. Okay. So that's my text animation done, and it really is quite it's quite easy to do. Now, the text is animating, and I know the timing. The next step is for me to bring a shape in and allow that shape to kind of separate the text from the background content, but also to animate in and then animate off, so it makes it a little bit more dynamic. To do that, I'm going to use a basic shape generator here, and you'll see, because I've selected shape, it pulls up the rectangle tool in the HUD. Change the fill. I think I usually give this a blue. Doesn't really matter. The outline, you can have one or you can leave it checked off. And I'll just draw that like so. Now, because I drew this straight onto the screen, it's popped it up at the top of all the layers, which means I can't see my text. That's fine. I'll just pull that down. Actually, it's a little bit difficult to pull things down and under, so I'll pull this up and over. Now, because the playhead was actually a little bit further out, the rectangle got dropped mid timeline. That's fine. I'll just extend that back, dragging its end. Okay, so watching the timing of my animation, I know that it's coming in roughly here, so I could start my shape animating in onto the screen roughly there. So the way this is going to work is the shape is going to come in, animate in with the text, stay there with the text, and then animate off the other side of the screen. So I'll line it up again. That's okay. I can adjust this the shape more once the animation is done as well. All I'm going to do basically with my shape is skew it, and there is a skew tool in there. And I'll just extend it out a little bit so that it looks right from the left hand side being off the screen and the right hand side being on screen. Okay, so I'll go back to the start of my animation. I can hold down shift, or I can just be careful when I drag it and it should lock, but if you hold down shift it will make sure that it only goes in one direction. Now, animating in motion is much like animating in Final Cut Pro. You select the layer that you want to animate, you go into the inspector, and rather than adjust the shape's own properties, I'm going to go into the overall properties tab here, and I'm going to adjust the position. And to do that, I'm going to use keyframes. So nothing new, I just add a keyframe. I go into where the text is just kind of arriving almost on screen, add another keyframe and pull that across. So you'll see that I don't have to do a lot of renders. I don't have to do any Command R or anything like that, because it's well able to give you instant playback. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. Maybe. Okay, I'll leave it for the moment. I'll tweak it a little bit when I'm done. Now the last part then, the text is just coming off. So just before it comes off, I'll add a keyframe. Add another keyframe a little bit further down the timeline and scooch that off to the right. That's basically it. So that's giving me what I need. I've got my primary, secondary text, I've got a shape separating the text from the background, and I've got some animation added to make it a bit more dynamic. Now what I might do with the shape is to bring down its transparency, or opacity rather. Now this can be quite nice because this will give you a little bit of the background so that you can see through the shape, and it's not quite such a hard shape to be looking at, so sometimes it can look a little bit overly basic. This gives it a little bit, makes it look a little bit more sophisticated. Now all I need to do now is save it and go back into Final Cut, and I will need to render this, so I'll give it a quick render. Now the last thing you would do if you were working on your own laptop is to go back into Motion and save this out as a template. Now templates are extremely handy in that you can save it out as basically an object that gets saved onto the system folders for Final Cut Pro on your machine. And what that allows you to do in Final Cut Pro is to then bring that out as a template and just update the text in Final Cut. Unfortunately, because of the way the machines are set up in the college, I can't write to, and you can't write any files to the Final Cut Pro system folders, so this can't actually be done in class. But if you're on your own machine, all you would do is save it as a template, and I'll see if I can pull up some templates here just to show you how that would. So master templates, that should, here we go, okay. So you've got all these lower thirds here as well, but these are Final Cut's presets. So here you've got a lower third. Now this would be effectively what you would see, but with your design. Okay, so yours would be saved in a kind of a user-generated folder full of lower thirds. But the beauty being that you wouldn't have to do a different lower third in Motion for each person that is talking on screen. You just load up the lower third in the viewer, and you've got some controls here that just allow you to change the text. So what did we call him again? I called him Mike Smith. And it updates it in there. Unfortunately, I can't demo that, and you can't do it on these machines because we don't have administrator rights to be saving our lower thirds onto the system folders. Okay, so that's it. That is lower thirds in Motion. So what you would have to do if you were working in the lab here is save that perhaps as Mike Smith, and then go out and save as and call it something like John. Give him my surname because I can't think of anything else. Save, and all you would do then is just go in and change the save that out, and then for each one then you can so if I save this as John Doyle and go back into Final Cut, I can just bring that in now as a piece of video basically. So actually no, what I would do before I do that is knock out the video So I change it to John Doyle, knock out the background. Now if I save that, go back into Final Cut and import it, and I'll bring in another piece of video for a different person. Same guy. Okay, let's just pretend this guy's John Doyle, so I'm not all day looking for it. So I can bring that in and then bring down the one that I'd created for John Doyle. So all I'm doing basically is I'm saving out a new version of my motion project without the background, because this is now transparent. I can go into Final Cut, import it, drag it down and use it. Okay, so the templates are a much better option, but that's just a basic workaround. If you need to have multiple lower thirds, just save them out as separate files, but without the background, and then they can be used as lower thirds without any. So you'll see here, it's just the text and not the background, so I can drag that over like that.